Uh, Hello and welcome to the Empowered Life program. I think it's episode 51. And the title we've been set today is to do with difficulties growing up, transitioning from youth to adults. And we're expecting a team from Zambia to join us. They haven't managed to join us, so you don't have young people by young people for young people today. It's one elderly gent and Essie from. So joining us and so from our program today, it's not what was expected. It's the unexpected. And for years I worked in youth work, and in working in youth work, in the Bible, you don't find teenagers. They were invented in the 1950s in America, but there always were problems of young people growing up into the adults they're meant to be. But we got a name for it in the 1950s with rock and roll and all of that things. 1950s teenagers were invented, and actually in the Bible you find this transition through from being a child to being considered an adult, and you find that happened at 13 in Jewish culture, and there's people have bar mitzvahs to celebrate that and things like that today in Jewish culture, and they have it for females as well. And so you have this whole transition was done quite well in those days. We've lost something in our society sometimes, and so that in some societies is well worked, in others is not. Here in the UK, it's not very well worked, but there's a lot of youth work trying to help with this turmoil and these difficulties, and into that is also the difficulties of culture, because some of us are not living in the country we were born in. I was born in Zimbabwe, in wonderful sunshine and beautiful weather. And I have moved to the UK. Some things are better in the UK, some things are a lot worse. There's lots of difficulties there. But I remember as a 16-year-old leaving the country of my birth. My parents had left 6 months before me. I stayed on to do my exams. So I'd had to live with people who were different to my parents for a while. And then when I moved to Northern Ireland, and for those of you listening from other parts of the world, Northern Ireland, being a lovely country that it is, and my heritage, a lot of my relatives come from there, but it's cold. And you go from an outdoor lifestyle to an indoor lifestyle. And so I arrived in the middle of winter when it was bitterly cold, straight from Zimbabwe with my suntan, which was wasted in Northern Ireland in the cold when you wrapped up as much as you can. But for me, everyone I met kept saying to me, it must be nice for you to be home. My parents had been on the mission field and had been missionaries in Zimbabwe for 17 years. So everyone was going, oh, it must be so nice to be back here after Africa. And for me, I was thinking, no, it isn't.
No.
And as a teenager, I thought, this isn't nice. I don't like this. I'm struggling. And they go, it's good to be home, isn't it? And everyone said, it's good to be home. And I'm thinking, this is not my home. My home is in Zimbabwe with my parents. And I remember sitting in my bedroom thinking, that's home. And then I began thinking, my parents have moved. Because my parents have moved, I now have nowhere to call home. My home does not exist in Zimbabwe without my parents. My home does not exist in Northern Ireland because there's no... this isn't home for me. This is an alien environment. The language might be the same, but if you take the accent out of it, but the accent's hard to understand, And there was all of this I was struggling with, and I remember crying in my bedroom and just being very upset. And actually, I was saying, God, home has been destroyed for me. I no longer have a home. Will I ever have home again? I don't think in my life I'll ever have a home, a place I call home. Because my land of my birth is my home, but it doesn't exist in the same way it did. My parents aren't there. There needs to be something of family that's home. So for me, I was praying, and God spoke to me in my tears, and He said, "Heaven is home." That's all the words He said. And then I began thinking about that. And when I began thinking about that, I began to realize that home was everywhere, because my real home was heaven. And until I'm there, I will never be truly at home. And because of that, that one statement from God made everywhere on earth home to me. It cured any kind of sense, because a lot of my friends, when they were growing up, their parents would say, "Oh, Zimbabwe's changed." Some of them ran away when Mugabe came into power. They ran away. They were worried about what would happen. Some of them ran to South Africa. Some ran to England. Some ran to Australia. Some ran to Kenya. Some ran to Canada. And you had this kind of diaspora of people who were worried. My dad and us, we weren't worried. We were very comfortable in that. But what happened was that this kind of, for me, once I realized where home was, there was no need to wander. There was no need to wander from nation to nation looking for something, because I realized that with God with me, home could be everywhere. And that was settled in me at 16 years old. That came to rest in me. I wasn't bothered by anyone's comments, "Oh, it must be good to be home." Actually, what I hadn't thought through fully, which I'm living in now, the church we were in Hillside and Bulawayo, prophesied over us when we left. They called our family to the front, they prayed for us and prophesied. And now I remember the words of a prophecy. Someone said, "This family were sent to what was regarded as darkest Africa. Today we send you from brightest Africa to darkest England." And I remember at 16 thinking, we're going to Northern Ireland. It's not England. They've missed. Here I am, sat in my chair in a shed in England. I have worked in England for years and years and years. And I know that somehow or other God sent me as a missionary to England from Zimbabwe. I have a sense of purpose. I have a sense of destiny. Now, I could say that in my 50s as an old man in his rocking chair. But trying to get there takes years. Trying to have an understanding and be settled and work those things through. So I think that's my little story, but I'll just share it to help you and maybe to bring some structure to some of the wrestles that go on. And for people who've had to change language, had to massively change cultures, had to massively do those things where they've moved countries, there's a huge amount of heartache. There's a huge amount of uncertainty. There's a huge amount of mountains to climb, sometimes fighting racism and fighting through things like that I've never had to fight in the same way. But in some of those things, there are huge obstacles. And so with the absence of Team Zambia, I thought, well, with Essie and myself, Essie has a lot of experience on this, and I'd open up to Essie and just say, would you like to tell us some of your understandings of crossing borders and things like that? Would you share some of your stories or some of your wisdom?
Thank you, Nigel. It was very interesting for me to listen to your story, which is a lovely story, by the way. And, there are so many blessings we can take from what we are, where we came from, and who we are. So who we are is like you have summed up. Home is everywhere because God is with us. I think that's a poignant point you have just made. And I will take that, because I never looked at it that way. But today, that's very beautiful, eye-opening for me. My background in terms of growing up, and we know, usually when we grow up, I always say when I'm talking to people, we have issues, I'll start asking, what do you think is happening? Because what we fail to understand is no matter how old we are, possibly me and you might be in the same era, we are looking towards 60. So we'll see things totally different
Mm-hmm.
from the youth of today. The youth of today will think we don't understand growing up. And if we say to anybody you don't understand growing up, I think it's thinking they were born in their 50s. And they think, they think life is all good, or they think, but people also had their struggles. It doesn't matter which era or what environment they were in, because struggles will always be there when you are a youth or when you are young, because you see your world in childhood lenses. So that can
That's
also
true.
take you through to adulthood. You find that's where we find relationships become very problematic, because people are still seeing their world in those childhood lenses. They've told themselves some stories which only themselves can understand and explain, because that's how they saw things. The same way you thought, well, my home is in Zimbabwe, and you know I've been moved to a place which I have no idea, and I can't stay in Zimbabwe because my parents are not there. I have to move to where they are, but that's not what I call home. Maybe they call that place home, but I don't know where I belong. I feel like that growing up in Rhodesia as a child of a Malawian immigrant, you have the neighborhood, calling you, you foreigners and whatever. And, I remember trying to understand as a child, what is the difference between me and the locals? Because there's no difference. We are all black, I mean, and we all look the same. I can speak the local language, I can speak that. And despite I was born in Harare, my dad is the one who is the immigrant. So that's a, a war which is within me. In terms of my dad is saying, no, 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 no. For our values and our cultures, our dresses are supposed to be long. You are supposed to put on those, and you put on those clothes, and then the local children will start laughing at you, making you labels. So you are struggling with trying to understand this. And then you have the Malawian relatives tell you, oh, you are not really Malawian. So where do you belong? Who are you? So who are you is a question which I would ask. Who are we? And my dad would say, no, no, you are royal priesthood. And I'm not even talking that my dad was talking about the Bible. My dad is always, my name is Princess. That's another name. It's a real name I've got. And because we've been always been told that our family is royalty. So that's one thing my dad used to be very good at. You are royalty. It doesn't matter what people are going to say to you. You are royalty. You tell them that in your country, which is Malawi, you are royalty. So that actually, for me, it pushed me. Whether it pushed my other siblings, I would not know. But as I'm telling you, you make up stories as you go along, because you're a child, you're trying to understand the environment. And then you get to an environment where, okay, uh, when I grew up now, when I knew who I was, I wasn't even a believer then. But, all those dresses I used to hate, and, my dad used to force them on us. I just, I sort of rebelled. You would say, you get to a rebellion stage where you just want to be identified. Yes, you guys have not accepted that I am part of you. So now this is me. I am Malawi, and deal with that. And then it changed like that, such that when I got married, then it sort of came back. You are sort of knocked back, you're not good, because immigrants are supposed to be all the time poor people who are suffering in their own country. They come here to disturb us and all that, which in a way might be true that they are economic migrants, but it's not that they are suffering there. It's just because you don't know where they come from, such that you can understand them better. So then it comes back. And I came to England, but I was already a married woman when I came to England. I got into a very new environment, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here? What is this environment? I don't even have a single person I could call a relative. And what am I doing here? And I remember getting into a depression. I think I've spoken about getting into a depression because everything the country was cold, the people was cold, the work was cold. I was working a lot of hours for next to nothing. I had left a very big job in a very well advanced place. And I'm thinking, I've just regressed. I've gone back to somewhere which is like, I can't even understand, and I can't even put a timeline on this. So, today you have actually equipped me with God is with me and home is everywhere. So it doesn't matter whether it means I can stop running. What am I running from? Where am I running to? It doesn't matter because all this is actually because if God is with you, you don't have to worry because we all know that one day we are just going to walk out of this tent and it will crumble back to the dust. The dustman is going to go back to the dust and the soul is going to go home. So why are we striving for going somewhere? I'm going to look for home because that's not what we're looking for. So the struggles with growing up is the stories we tell ourselves in childhood. And I think what we also need to realize is we need to have a time where if things are happening with children, we need to be intentional with sitting them down and telling them the truth of what is happening. Because when we don't do that, that's when they will make up their own stories. So I'm sure if the tailors had set you down and said, listen, the three of you with your siblings, listen, we were born in a country code. So whilst we were in that country, God told us to come and serve him.
Yeah.
But we were never going to settle here because we are supposed to follow God. So we don't know where we will end up. One day we might uproot and get our sticks and start moving, because then the child is going to be able to understand.
Yeah.
Because I think if we look at how the Israelites were moving, they used to be able to do their stories generation to generation because they would explain. And everybody, that's why you find there's no teenager in the Bible. It's because people were moving as families, but you would all know, I know Paul was talking to Timothy and saying, don't let them despise your youth.
Yeah.
They would know that you've got some experience because you've seen people do that, you've heard that, because everybody used to say, gather around. This is a time to talk about what the Lord has said. And the Lord has said A, B, C, D. So I think for today's world, what I could say is for us as parents is to be able to communicate. It doesn't matter how bad things are. Let's take an example of children living in Ukraine at the moment. Are we telling them what is happening so that they understand? Or are we shielding them and saying things are going to be better when we don't know? You know what I mean? Because we get into, we can't tell children like that. And after the time we'll say it's because we were protecting you. What are you protecting us from? Why are you protecting what I don't know?
Yeah.
You're protecting because some people will say, why didn't you tell me so that I can make my own decision?
Yeah.
How come nobody bothered to tell me so that I can make my own understanding? Because every human being, in my perspective, needs to be able to understand things on a perspective. And I think from my point of view, my dad took time to explain. And till to today, there are things I'm like, like now I'm writing a book about sons. And I call my dad and say, Dad, can you just tell me about this? I've just thought this. I've seen this and that happening in Zimbabwe on that sort of cultural. What does your culture do on that? Then he'll give me a take on his and say, these things used to happen like that because of that. And I'm thinking, oh, all right. So I've learned something.
Yeah.
So you see, because at times children no longer ask, because maybe we didn't start by freely offering them information. Because once we open dialogue, usually children are free to come back and converse because they know you are open to that. Because if we don't, they won't come, because they don't know whether you've got the time or you want to hear what they think.
Yeah.
I think that's my take on that little story.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Essie. That's fantastic. It's. I think there's a lot of. I think for young people working through these things, there's a lot of other issues that come up. Whereas you and I are sorted in this. I'm married. You're married. There's some of that. But for working through some of these things, it's well, who will I marry? Will I marry someone in this new country I'm in? If I do marry someone that I know from school or for something like that, there are cultural things that cause barriers. So when I was in Australia, we had a Chinese pastor who had a Vietnamese wife, and they were brilliant. His mission model of how he reached people, he was a brilliant chef. He would go to a Chinese restaurant and say, "You're struggling to open up. I will come and cook for you for a month for free." And he would come in and cook for free. And he helped all these restaurants get started. But he said, "I'm a pastor. I'll tell you about Jesus while I do it." So he told all these communities. He said it took 2.5 years from that moment where he did that for someone to become a Christian. And then he had a church made up of all these people from these different restaurants all over the coast. and when they brought their tithes to the church, they brought king prawns and they brought in vegetable form, So he always had food, and that's how he lived. And so you had this whole thing going. And the church I was pastor in there, associate pastor in, we let him use the building in the afternoons for the Chinese church. And I got invited to various things. But his children were in our church school. And there were some boys, Australian boys, who thought his daughters were very nice and wanted to be in a relationship with him. And the daughters were very stressed because they liked some of the boys as well, but they knew that their father might not be very agreeable with this. And I remember trying to talk to him just to see where things were, and for him it was a very difficult subject. He said, "No, they can that's no. We're from this culture. This happens differently." He didn't even want to open the conversation on some of those things. So for his young people, they were stuck in this situation where, as teenagers growing up in Australia, and thinking, "Wow, I like that boy. He looks very nice. And I like the way he plays sport," and all those things. And at the same time, you've got this father saying, "No, we're not even opening that yet." and so I can understand the father's point of view, having daughters of my own. I'm not ready to open that in a rush. but you've got some of those things there that are really difficult. You might know God's with you. You might know those things, but then sometimes working through some of the finer points. And I think this is what's not clear, because people move countries for lots of different reasons. Some of it is from trouble, like the Ukraine, as we're discussing at the moment, and there's some of those things that are around that people move because of that. So they don't move on purpose to a nation thinking our purpose in this nation will be for so many years, and then we move back and we set up a lovely retirement thing for ourselves, and our children will then have dual nationality. They can do lots of, there might be a big long range plan like that for some. For others, it might be we've left war. We've found ourselves in this nation. Now we've got to grow up in this nation. We don't know whether we'll be able to return to our home nation.
Yep.
What do we do with that? What do we tell our children if they then, like 18, 19, they want to get, 20, they want to get married? Does that happen in the new country you're in, or is that something you keep waiting? Maybe we'll be back there one day. And so there's this living in different worlds that's very, very difficult. And I think for the next generation, those things need to be settled and rested in the heart. And so I'm also in touch with people who've been telling me they've kept a house going in another nation that they've been investing in the whole way through. They've now got to the point where they're my age, a bit older than me. They say, I don't want to go back there when I retire. I want to stay in the UK. In fact, this is the area of the UK I want to move to. So they're then saying, why am I spending money making the garden nicer, making the wall around this house nicer? Why am I doing all of that for this house that I don't want to move to?
Mm.
Am I better selling that off and just putting my lot in here? The people are saying, my children, they are settled here in university, they're going into good jobs here, they're going to stay here for their lives.
Mm.
So in some ways the draw to go back and those things are issues where families are making decisions about what they do for the next stage. And then you've got the generation after that. So in some ways my Zimbabwean experience, I'm trying to help my children understand a little bit about what it's like to be Irish. They like the idea of that. But I haven't managed to teach them much about Zimbabwe because I haven't brought them back. It's too expensive and all the rest of it. There's always been something else in the way. But one day I'd like to. But actually in that, there's some of these things I'd love them to know. I'd love them to see the Victoria Falls. I'd love them to feel the spray. I'd love them to see the school I had to cycle to. I'd love them to see the track I had to go through the bush to get there. I'd if it still exists, I'd love them to see areas that were very precious to me. But actually and I'd love them to learn to stalk game. I used to go and walk, try and get close to zebra and to things like that, a little bit out from our city. I used to cycle out there. I'd love them to experience that. They've had no experience. They can go to a zoo and see an animal. It's not the same. Now for me, there's things I've had to let go of. I know actually my children may not get to see this. So there's a wrestle on a number of that's a simple one. There's far more complex for other people, but what I'm saying is some of those things are simple issues, and I just wondered, Essie, have you got any wisdom? I mean, this is a difficult question, but do you see this pattern? Do you see how this works? The difficulties with it? How much of it is weight is on where we've come from? And some of those decisions is that now where is home? In some ways we know home's everywhere because God's got us, but where so I remember there was a couple, so just before I go, there was a couple who were doing missionary work in a country. It was hard missionary work, okay, and they were from two different cultures, and so I felt I should ask the question, where will you be buried? And you would not believe what happened. You had the husband saying, well, we will go back to my nation in Africa and this is where we will settle. And the wife's like, no, I want to go back to England where my family is. And you suddenly realize this married couple who'd been going through life had never had that conversation before. I tiptoed out, let it go. But it helped them realize where they were going to settle long term. It helped them work through. It was a difficult question, and I would never like to ask that question. I would never do it as insensitively as I did. But in that, they began to work through long term. Where are we going to settle? Where are we going to be old people together? Where is that going to be? And they worked some of that out. So I just don't know. Is that a useful thing to throw up, Essie? I'm just wondering what your wisdom is on it.
I think I'm just going to start first by responding to the pastor's children, because I think that's a very big issue which we don't talk about. And where are we being pastors when we are preaching to other people? And then when it comes into my household, it's now too close to home and I have to decide on my own? Or am I going to say I'm going to let God decide for that? That's one question. And we also know that, I'm not sure whether you have noticed that pastors' children with behavioral problems, because they feel isolated, they are judged by the congregation whether they are not being too Jesus-y or too Christian-y, or, possibly, and pastors have got no time for their children, and they can pastor everybody else and not have dialogue with it. Because if the daughters had a dialogue with dad, which is open, they would ask, you would throw it. If you've got any question, just the way I was open with my dad, I would ask anything. So I could ask him, what if I marry somebody like that? I remember my dad said, you should marry a Malawian. I didn't marry a Malawian, but I knew that's what my dad wanted. And when I said to him I was getting married, he said, well, I would have loved you to marry Malawan, but well, you've made a decision, but I'll tell you about these people, A, B, C, D, and whatever. And when struggles started coming, I was remembering that I think he was right there, but that's an open dialogue. But the problem we have with pastors and their children is there is no that dialogue. We've got being pastor in church, and when he gets home, it's different. He's a man of the house, and it's different. And those double standards are usually very detrimental to the emotional well-being of the children, because they are isolated and lonely and they don't know who to go. And I'm sure possibly you've heard about Bishop T.D. Jake's daughter, 13-year-old, got pregnant, and she spoke about, I didn't know who to talk to, because there was, and I remember Bishop T.D. Jack said, you are looking and people are saying, but your child can't do that, the church and whatever. And I said, no, this is my daughter. If he hadn't acted as a father would, maybe that child now is a big preacher woman married to somebody else, but she got a child at 13. Because that time, there was no room for them to have a relationship with their dad. Or, so, and also there's no room for failure. Once you ask the child that there's no room for failure, what you have just said to them is, you have to be perfect. No one is going to be perfect. Not even you who is preaching, you are not going to be perfect. And there's no way you can say you want that child to be perfect when you are not actually acting like what Christ wants you to be, because we are supposed to be Christ in action. So if we are not acting like what Jesus would do, then we do have a problem. Then we do have mixed marriages where you are married to this one, the other one, you don't know where are we going, where am I going to get married. It happens. We had that conversation with my mom. My mom says I want to be buried in the village, somewhere in her village. And she's got a husband in Harare. So if you go and get buried in your village, and where does that leave this person you call your husband? Because he's foreign in Zimbabwe, what do you want him to be? Obviously, he can be buried locally in Harare, but why are you now getting separated at death? So those are actually very vital issues which people need to be able to discuss. But you know how it is when people are courting you, as I always say, you say you fall in love, you forget that falling in love, does that mean that everything is going to be honky-dory? No. It's going to be a journey, but this journey has to be an exposition journey. You need to be able to have time to discuss issues. What are we going to do? I know me and Max have been saying, where do we want to retire? At one stage, we thought we want to go and retire in New Zealand. I mean, it's just for adventure's sake. for us, possibly it's easy because we don't have children. Because now people with children will say, "Oh, will my children come to New Zealand or whatever?" For us, as long as, if we are still breathing and alive and able to do things, we can go and do things everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's for us. But there is a massive problem in where people, because death is not something which we discuss, is it?
No.
We don't,
Yeah.
because those are some of the taboo issues. Just like you would think discussing that your daughter has got a boyfriend. As a pastor, you are thinking, why would you be telling me that? But who are they supposed to tell?
Yeah.
Because if you look culturally, we do have cultures which are different. Like now, we've got our children in UK. They are going to meet somebody who comes from Bermuda and say, I want to marry that one. It's totally cultural differences and things like that. The African system is you look after your mother-in-law and your father-in-law and things like that. Are they going to be able to do that? So these are real issues which we need to be talking about.
Yeah.
So that when youth are listening before they get married, they understand what it means.
Yeah.
Yes, you can fall in love with anybody, but are you going to be able to make a lasting marriage, which you're going to be able to move through the challenges of all these issues of cultural norms and values, which are going to be totally different depending on where you come from. So that's what I would say is in takeaway. And where you grew up, or how you grew up as a child, those childhood lenses I said earlier on, if you have not had any explanation of why things happened in your life, will impact your relationship, whether it's marriage or not. So people need to get their which makes me too competitive, because some things will come because of, did somebody thought you were not going to measure up or whatever, because you'll find maybe you want to marry a girl and the dad says, no, no, you don't have money to marry my daughter. And, before you know it, you prove him wrong that you're going to marry. So you're going to be working to try and prove that man wrong. So those things are issues. It means there are some hidden childhood issues which you have not been intentional enough to take and understand that, that's the reason why you are acting the way you are acting. Because in your childhood, there are things which you didn't understand at that time, and you are actually acting them out. We come back to the matters of the heart. Remember when we discussed the book, The Matters of the Heart? What's in your heart is what will come out.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I could just sum up all that.
Yeah. Thanks, Essie. And I think a lot of these things in youth work, they always say a youth worker who's good, when they get home, they forget everything they've learned. They're useless with their own kids. They always say those things. And I think with pastors, I think the hardest person to lead is yourself, and the hardest place to pastor is home. And I think that goes together. And I think there's a lot for us as pastors to learn. There's a lot of mistakes I've made that I have learned from. But one of the things I always said in youth work is young people want to know the why.
Yeah.
You don't say, do this, do the dishes, do this, clean the floor, do this. You're always tied into a why. And if you tie it into the why, it's much better, because you're actually envisioning along with the task. You're actually helping an understanding of something that actually brings things through, and so that's much more helpful. And so so I think there's some big things there. I think we've talked around a huge subject. I'm noticing we may have someone joining us. I'm beginning to realize there might be a time difference.
Yes,
because the clock's changed in the UK, and there might be some issues there. So, so I think what we will do is we will finish our conversation now,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll have a talk with Team Zambia if they join us, and if they
Mm.
do, then we can see how to run that further. But we might do it next week. We'll see.
Yes.
Okay,
Mm.
so thank you
Yeah.
very much, Essie. Really appreciate your wisdom. We've talked around a very difficult subject, probably opened loads and loads of issues for other programs.
Mm-hmm.
If some of you are
Mm.
listening to this and you think, yes, I want to discuss this more, yes, this is issues, because for me, in the UK here as a missionary to the UK from Zimbabwe, as the issues to do with knife crime, the issues to do with gangs, the
Mm.
issues to do with the exploitation of young people that are happening
Mm.
here are very often linked to insecure destiny,
Yes.
insecure person, knowing who you are, knowing those things, understanding the why. And so I think there's a lot to discuss in this. If some of you have better experience of that than me and want to chip in, please write it in the comments. Please, you can also phone us. I'm not sure, I haven't got the phone number in front of me, but you can contact us and go from there, and we will look to see if we can open that up in some other programs. We'll just leave it for now. We're being joined by Team Zambia. Okay.
Okay. Can I just say our number? Our number is 073 06880475. I'll repeat, this is a UK number, so it will be +44 730 688 0475. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. God bless you, Essie, and we'll take the program offline. There we go.